You're listening to a podcast by the Center for Action and Contemplation. To learn more, visit cac.org.
This podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners like you. My name is Elizabeth, and from all of us at the Center for Action and Contemplation, thank you. Your support introduces thousands of people to Christian contemplative wisdom and practices, fostering spiritual transformation and inspiring loving action. Here's Joe M., a listener from Minneapolis, Minnesota, who shares this story with us.
I found CAC's podcast following this really intense season of activism where myself and my friends were deeply involved in trying to stop this oil pipeline and also facing the failure of our efforts and facing the poisoning of the Mississippi River. That was when I discovered the CAC podcasts and the hosts inviting me to be present to that moment, or at least that God in Christ was there with me in that moment and with my friends. So it's been a gift to listen to the podcast in that season especially.
Twice per year, we pause and invite your support. Your generosity makes it possible for seekers like Joe to discover accessible, practical, and transformative spiritual wisdom. Every gift, no matter the amount, helps others find steady strength through contemplative wisdom. If you'd like to partner with us in this work, please consider making a gift by visiting cac.org/support. That's cac.org/support. Thank you for walking this path with us.
Hi, everyone. It's Brian. One of the assumptions that guide us in making Learning How to See is that we really learn best together in conversation, in community, and by asking questions we can't answer alone. I have a favor to ask. If this podcast has been helpful to you, would you consider leaving a rating or review wherever you listen? That small gesture helps other spiritual seekers find their way here, and it helps us grow the community of people learning how to see and learning how to love. And please keep your questions coming. Your questions guide us, and they help us feel connected as fellow learners. You can always reach us at podcasts@cac.org. Hi, I'm Brian McLaren.
And I'm Carmen Acevedo Butcher. And welcome to Learning How to See.
As the podcast name suggests, this podcast is about seeing.
Each season, we explore some aspect of learning to see, learning to encounter reality, not just on the surface with our eyes, but deeply with our whole being. And this season, we're exploring what it means to see with eyes of love.
Thank you for trusting us with this time and for being the kind of person who cares about learning how to see with eyes of love.
In today's episode, Brian and I will be in conversation with our friend and colleague, Cassidy Hall. Cassidy is an author, podcaster, award-winning filmmaker, and a leading voice in contemplative spirituality. We'll be sharing together on a difficult but very important subject: loving people who oppose our values.
Our values represent things we love. And when people oppose things we love, it's terribly easy to resent or even hate them. And then, in the name of love, we find ourselves feeling hatred for people. Something about that should seem not quite right to us.
And that's why this episode is so important. After our conversation, Brian and I will lead you in a guided meditation and then conclude with a few minutes of silent contemplation.
It is our hope and prayer that after our time together, you will feel recentered on what really matters, and we hope that you will open your eyes with a deeper sense of love for all you encounter.
Well, Carmen and Brian, I have long admired and been grateful for your wisdom and your teachings, your books, your very lives. So what a joy it is to kind of shake things up a bit with you and flip the script or turn the tables here to speak about some of these challenging aspects of love and loving, specifically your stories and experiences with loving those who oppose our values. This is not an easy topic.
You're right about that, Carmen. And I'm sure have both had our own personal experiences with this, but we also can look back in history and see that very often the people we admire the most and who've most inspired us are people who have lived right in this, I don't want to say crosshairs, that's a bad metaphor, but in a certain sense, it reminds us that people oppose values enough to be violent about them. And for example, even if we stand for the value of nonviolence, that can instill in other people a desire to be violent toward us for taking that stand. So it is an intense and important thing.
And Cassidy, I want to say thank you for being willing to flip the tables, because you do so much behind the scenes, and we just love you so much. So we're glad you're doing this with us today. Thank you.
Well, you're giving me the easy part today, so especially with this question. So before we really dive in, I'm wondering if, first of all, we could maybe, both of you could define what values mean for you in this conversation. So what do we mean by the word values when we say that?
The word value is so abstract, and it's a little bit like chicken. What does chicken taste like? It tastes like whatever spice you put on it, right? So pretty much value often is in the eye of the beholder. I have a disability. I have dyslexia. And one of the ways I've coped with that over the decades is to study word history. So when you asked us this, Cassidy, my thought was, wow, what a good question to ask, just to spend time with it. And I looked up the etymology of value because I didn't know what it was. And it comes from this ancient root, WAL, which means to be strong. And so value is related to words like valor and valid and wield and prevail. And so it has at the core of it strength. So to me, a value is something that gives me strength and gives the community I'm in strength. So in other words, value is related to health. So I'm really grateful for that grounding in it, for me anyway.
I love that etymological insight, Carmen. After you explain that, I want to call you Dr. Butcher because that's you in your professorial insight. But that idea of strength is interesting because what it suggests to me is that different things have a different strength to different people. And when I think of the word value, obviously I think quickly of economics because we often refer to value in relation to money. And in our economic system, money, dollars, euros, whatever, become this standard by which we assign value to things. But there are things that money can't buy. And when we are dealing with those things, they have, and this is where that word strength comes to mind, they have emotional strength in swaying how we feel about something. And let me just give maybe two other thoughts that come from the world of economics. I think when we talk about values, and especially moral values, sometimes there are absolute values for us. We're saying, for no amount of money would I do that. There is nothing else that could make me say I would go along with that, or I'd be happy about it, or I would do it, or I would approve of it, or tolerate it, or whatever. And then other things have relative value, where we have to make choices where we're choosing between two things we care about. And so we're negotiating with relative values. So Cassidy, by asking that question, I think to start us off, you help us realize we're stepping into this issue of things that are very powerful and strong working within us because they deal with measures of importance to us. And let me just give one last example. I'm very concerned about the environment. I think caring about our earth, caring about climate, caring about soil, caring about extinction of species, caring about how much land we decide needs to be paved into a parking lot, that has a lot of value to me. But then I look at a guy like Elon Musk or many of our political leaders, and they have a completely different set of values. Interestingly, this brings us back to money because the people with a whole lot of money tend to set the value of things for a lot of the rest of us, or they have power to set values. And then the rest of us are struggling because they are saying things aren't worth much that we feel are worth a lot. So that adds to the dynamics of kind of the political and economics of us talking about values.
What you're saying there about the economics of it. So for me, what value ultimately means, because you know how the love of money is the root of all cruelty and evil. For me, value ultimately means love. in all its forms,
Mm.
which is, God's economy is based on love and worth, not how much someone has or makes. So I'm glad you brought up the economy part of it, Brian.
And Carmen, that brings us back to strength, to that idea of strength.
Yeah.
The strength of my love for something is what I'm talking about when we talk about value.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you guys talked about the relative nature and the measure of values, but also, this strength and this undergirding. What are the things that undergird our lives? And I know out there somewhere, there's, that strengths finder thing. There's also like a values finder type tool that's really useful for a lot of groups to kind of navigate what your values are. But when it comes to love, it's a much easier answer, isn't it? To talk about our values, I think, when it comes to love. So what is an example of a time you found yourself loving someone who opposed your values, and how did you find that challenging? I guess I also wonder, in these instances, did you find yourself kind of ebbing and flowing between love and hatred, if you're honest, and or continuing to make the choice to love just to assert that love? And was that kind of this internal, external experience?
You both know I grew up in a very religious background, very religious family. And my parents were very loving, kind, good-hearted people. But the religious background I grew up in was fundamentalist. And I know that's something we share to various degrees. What really, in some ways, earned me notoriety as I was, a young pastor and a young emerging leader, I guess you'd say, is that I grew up in a tradition that we loved our tradition. And we loved the theological distinctives of our tradition. They had a lot of value to us. Our valor for those doctrines was very, very strong. And when I became a pastor, I saw how many people were being hurt by some of our teachings, our doctrines that people in our tradition held very dear. I had to make a choice. Did I love the people in my life more than I loved the teaching?
Mm-hmm.
Or the way that my community applied that teaching? At a very deep level, I made a choice. I loved the people more, and I wanted to listen to the people. I wish I had, been even more strong in that value, but it took time for me to, in a sense, relativize some of the teachings of my religious tradition so that I could strengthen my value of people. But what this meant then is that the gatekeepers of my tradition, when they saw me challenging the status quo, they made decisions to go after me. For a long time, I had a lot of people who got a lot of hits and follows in the early days of the internet by identifying me with the devil and so on. And that's what people in my tradition did when someone differed from our doctrine. Yeah, that was probably my baptism into having to deal with people who oppose my values. And of course, it got pitched not as different values, but it got pitched in that context as different doctrines or different beliefs. But underneath the beliefs were love's values.
And did you vacillate, like sometimes in this dynamic?
I negotiated. I'd have to say that I negotiated because I realized that what they wanted to do is to make me discredited so that I had no place in the community anymore. And I wanted to keep a place in the community because that's who I was, that's where I was from. But also, I wanted to influence my community to do less harm to people. So if they succeeded in discrediting me, I would lose my chance to try to influence people in a way. But that was the terms of the struggle. How about you, Carmen?
I really appreciate that too. I just want to say, Brian, because I really appreciate, it seems a Jesus thing to do, that you chose people over dogma. And then you tried to negotiate within that very hard situation. That's a good story for us to consider. This is such a hard question in a way that, Cassidy, I'm so glad that you ask it because it's given me great value simply to ask the question in the preparation for this. And I think it's almost a question that's more important to ask than to answer in that Rilkean sense of live the questions now. For me, when I think of the first person who opposed my values, it was my father who was sick and was violent. And I was a peacemaker and an introvert who just wanted everyone to get along. and I loved my father dearly. He's dead now. People talk about enemies outside of us, but my experience with enemies began in my own home. And as I've, grown up and been out in the world, I've realized I'm not alone. That Emily Sandé song, "You Are Not Alone." A lot of people who have experienced that. And yes, I went between love and hate. Yes. And it is scary. It is so scary to feel raw hate, especially when, if you raised your hand to anyone, they would be like, no, you can't hate your father. But given the things that were happening, it would have been violence to myself not to have a response like that. As a therapist told me once, that was a normal response, Carmen, she said. But then what do you do with that? My goodness, I tell you, Jesus never said it was easy. One of the things that gave me as a gift is that I had to look at my shadow. So then there's another even closer potential enemy, which is that we don't talk about, which is myself and myselves. And so I always am really grateful now for the difficulties I had young, and I would never wish them on anyone. It taught me to look inside. God gave me the grace to look inside and to try to befriend myself, because I used to be the queen of being unkind to myself. Wow, it's very unhealthy and painful. And over time, through translating and friends, my kind husband, all this kind of love that came my way from my mother also. She's the kindest person in my early years, never said an unkind word to me, such a genuine, supportive person. But over that time, I came to have self-compassion. So for me, that is a strength and a value. I'm really grateful. We can talk about this a little later, but what we do with feelings of hatred has been something that has consumed my contemplative walk for decades, really. Yeah.
Yeah. And Carmen, one of the things I'm hearing you talk about is, Brian, you had mentioned kind of equating values with love and loves. And when we love the teachings and the doctrines more than people, we're missing the point. And Carmen, you're also reminding us that, while that may be the case, while people and loves may need to be the center, we also have to have boundaries. We also have to address our own shadow work, because not all people are going to make this loving thing easy, and we need to love ourselves also.
I think, Carmen, as you described, the coexistence of love and hate when you were being mistreated.
Mm-hmm.
One way that has made sense to me is to make an analogy between physical pain and emotional pain. And to say, when I feel physical pain, in fact, this just happened to me. I was cooking the other night and I put my hand on the hot part of the stove, and I didn't have to sit and think, this is causing tissue damage. Maybe I should move my hand. My body responds by making me feel pain and pull my hand away even faster than I felt the pain. My hand was away from the stove before I consciously felt the pain. And I think emotionally, we have that same kind of quick response. And it's a response of self-protection. It's a good response. It's a necessary response. We will die. You would have been destroyed by what was going on in your family if you hadn't had that strong emotional response faster than you could think about it. I think it's important for us to realize that when Jesus says love your neighbor, he doesn't say love your neighbor absolutely. He says love your neighbor as yourself. There's this balance of relative values. And it seems to me the corresponding emotion to physical pain that makes us react quickly is anger. And there is our challenge. As anger comes up, he shouldn't be treating me this way. These people shouldn't be talking about me this way. These people shouldn't be working for those policies that hurt people who we know and love. Anger is the right response. But then we face this danger. Friedrich Nietzsche, I don't often quote him, but here's the one place where I often quote him. He said, "Beware when fighting the monster, lest you become the monster." And this is where I think all of us who have values and people oppose those values, and we want to not let those people win, because if they win, these things that we love and cherish will be harmed. Well, now how do we engage in that struggle without becoming hateful and mirroring the same oppositional attitude that people often have toward us, that's where it becomes tough.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought that quote in and the analogy of the stove, because that is so embodied and so resonates with my experience, what I was talking about. So thank you. And it reminds me what you were just saying of Walter Wink, the theologian, who says that you become what you hate. And so for me, I remember thinking at one point, and because of the trauma, there are some years where it's hard for me to know what year it was that this happened. But I know that I was sitting on burnt orange carpet. So that was in my parents' house outside of Canton. So I was, I think, in college and home for some time. And I remember sitting in the back bedroom where I had grown up with my two sisters. They're twins, and we shared a bedroom. And then my brother had the one in front of it. And I was sitting on that floor and just totally, like, I remember I just said to God, I'm sitting on the ground. I said, look, I hate my father. I don't want to forgive him, but I need to for me, for my health, because I don't want to become that. And so I said literally to God, you know, the way, Brian, Cassidy, you can have an honest conversation and you think this is the worst prayer ever. and then something happens. And I literally said, I don't want to forgive him. Really, he doesn't deserve it. It doesn't look like it to me, but would you help me? Because I think I need that. And all of a sudden, it was like this door in my heart opened up and a river flowed through it. And I did not understand what that was. And, you know, as Becca Stevens says, it was not an event, but it began my journey of healing. And Corrie ten Boom said that forgiveness is a little bit like you've been ringing this bell. You've been grabbing hold of this rope and swinging and ringing this big bell. And forgiveness begins when you let go of the rope, and then the bell slowly starts stopping. And if you don't grab hold of the rope again, if you can let go, keep it let go, then you have a journey towards some forgiveness. And I think that with harm that has been done to us, it is a lifelong endeavor. Even though when my father died, I was mostly relieved because my family could have some peace, but I had made my peace with him before. But it is an ongoing, as you were talking a minute ago, Brian, is an ongoing negotiation because I find new ways in me that I didn't know I was harmed, and I have to rely on grace and ask God to help me. It's very humbling, actually.
When we think about this question, you know, loving those people who oppose our values in the grand scheme of some situations like we're talking about right now, do you think that righteous anger, that anger that comes from God in some of these moments of harm, creates a shell from our softness just enough that we can go to that place of protection, which is actually the place of love, or go to that place of boundaries, which is actually the place of love? I wonder if that's the case.
It brings me back to the word strong at the root, etymological root value that Carmen brought up. When we love something, we want to protect it. When we love something strongly, we will risk more and more and more to try to protect it. So this is the thing. For a lot of people, they think that love is only softness, but love is also fierceness. And I think what happens is the fierce side of love emerges in us, right?
I love that.
I actually like that. Can I just say, Cassidy, thank you for giving us permission. And Brian, thank you for giving us permission as a way of protecting ourselves and those we love to have that moment of real, raw anger.
I think it is a liberating thing for us to be able to say, there are people who oppose our values. And there are people then who oppose us. And if they win, they want to harm us. They want to destroy us. It might be intentional. It might be hatred on their part. It might be insensitivity on their part. They don't even notice us, or they don't even know the harm they're doing. It might be ignorance. It might be the fact that they're part of a team that's telling them to behave in a certain way. And their loyalty to the team makes them oblivious to the harm that they do. They're celebrating their team's win in that sense, right? We don't have to say there's malice on their part, although there might be, but we can say there is a contest here of values and people will be harmed. And now we have this complicated choice. It's not just enough to be right. It's we have to say, how am I going to respond? How am I going to insert myself in this contest of values? How am I going to do it in a way that maybe produces the most good and that doesn't produce unintended negative consequences? And this is not easy, right? But this is why it's worth it for us to keep growing and maturing, because this allows us then to be players in this contest of values in life and to stand up and use the voice that we were given, use the space and strengths that we're given. I watch my kids who are parents often speak to their younger children, say, use your words, use your words. we have to learn that same thing.
Yeah. I'm going to pivot us just a tiny bit because this is a question I really was eager to ask you guys. And that is when we find ourselves in a place of a privileged identity. For example, I may be a queer white woman, but I'm still white. So what is our role in loving those who oppose the values of those who may have less privilege than us? How do we cultivate that change? Is it possible to cultivate change? And when is this work maybe even also a form of activism? But that being said, how do we do all that with authenticity and not force, with conversation and not conversion? How do we be true to the value? How do we have our values with integrity?
Carmen, in some ways, I'm most interested to hear your response to this, but let me just say this issue of privilege that's such a key part of that question, Cassidy, is so, so important for us to get on the table, especially in these times, because we're having this conversation in a political era, in an economic era. There are things going on in our world. There are wars happening, and they are deeply related to issues of privilege. You know, there's a saying that when you're used to privilege, being treated with fairness feels like persecution. So there are a whole lot of people who've been treated with privilege and it doesn't feel like it. If I could say one thing as a white male here, I think this might be useful. White, straight males often treat other people not very well, but they also often don't treat other white males very well. And so you can be a white male who is primarily aware of how other white males don't treat you well. And you can feel very oppressed because those white males are so powerful that they can make your life miserable. And then that makes it harder for you to understand the vantage point of other people because you're so aware of how you suffer. And so this is just a reminder to us that the relative values to say, look, my values matter and I have to stand up for them. But other people have experiences too. And if I only care about my values, I'm a selfish person. And if I'm unwilling to care about how life is going for other people, well, Jesus said it this way. He said, don't the Gentiles do that? In other words, yeah, we're not distinguishing ourselves very much at that point. And so this issue of privilege, I think, is a reminder to us to have that empathy that is required if we're to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. Don't stop with loving ourselves and being concerned with our own interests and values.
Cassidy, I'm glad you brought this up because at first when you asked this question, it stymied me a bit. Then I started thinking about it and thought about how when I was growing up, one of the paths through difficulties was my mother's love. So the first thing that I realized, how I looked was my mother saying, Carmen, you have such beautiful olive skin. I wish I had beautiful, because my mother's white and my dad was Cuban and dark-skinned. And I kind of was the cafe latte combination of the two. So I grew up thinking, wow, I have brown skin. This is beautiful. It had no other valences to it. It was just my mother's love. It's a bit like a Harry Potter moment, where your mother will step in front of bolts for you. And literally, as I got older, for me, being raised in a white community, it was difficult. I experienced violence in different ways, physical violence, and also bullying. And then I grew up a woman in Southern Baptist churches and expected to, and keeping the nursery because I was nothing, Brian, Cassidy, if not conscientious. And all the while I was thinking, it all started to kind of go sideways, all at once. And I worked my way through college. I was a first generation student and grad school. My dad told me, you can't go, we can't afford it. There are 3 behind you. And we didn't have money. And so my mom made all my clothes growing up. And I was grateful for it because they fit so well, they were handmade, but there was a reason for that. And then the abuse from my father. And so I often did not feel welcomed by the white world. And then I had dyslexia, so I felt dumb. But I had these kind teachers. I'm going to say that I didn't grow up from a position of privilege. And, people talk about this. There were many different aspects of that. But I had kind teachers. Hoo-wee. I could count the blessings of my kind teachers from now until the cows come home. And that's what I really choose to look at. And it's one reason that I try to be a kind teacher. And today, I have the privilege of being older and a teacher at a university. And I have students coming into and by God's grace, and by being a teaching assistant and a research assistant, I was able to get, a PhD. But I have students who are first generation, low socioeconomic. I have students who struggle with things who are from all walks of life. And I have the privilege of helping them. So one of the things I try to do is not make assumptions, because I think one of my values is respect, and the re part meaning again, and spect being like spectacles to look. And so as a teacher, I have an obligation, I have a practice as a teacher to look at students again and not assume, because we all make assumptions. That's how our eyes work to help us navigate things. But I think the contemplative will look twice and 3 times and 4 times and ask students questions to see really, who are they? How can I love them? You know what I'm saying, Cassidy? Because it's too easy to stereotype each other, all of us.
The contemplative will look 2 or 3 or 4 times. That sticks with me. What a call that is to the contemplative path, but also the truth of the contemplative path, the willingness to keep looking, the willingness to keep understanding. Carmen, earlier in the conversation, you kind of brought up boundaries, the need for boundaries. And when we love those who oppose our values, I guess I'm curious at what point, I think some people might wonder, at what point are we compromising our values? I think about, in this particular political climate, I think about Jesus saying, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, like some of these really difficult things. So at what point are we compromising our values? And maybe how do boundaries fit in here also?
Goodness, that's so, so good, because I've spent a lot of my life trying to build a self, not really having the container for that growing up. And I actually said this to a friend of mine recently who, used to be a therapist, among many other things. I just threw it out there. And this is one of those friends when you throw something out that you think is like a really good thing everybody should agree with. She might say something different. And I said to her, my life has gotten so much better since I've learned to have boundaries. And she said, I don't believe in boundaries. And I was like, wait, that was a record scratch moment in our conversation. And I said, what? Can you explain? Because we're good friends. And so it was like, tell me, what do you mean? And she said something so helpful that I actually asked her to send it to me later, because I couldn't quite get all of it in. And I needed to think about it like a word to me, like an Amma speaking a word to me. And she said, and I'm just going to read it, boundaries are walls. They do not define me or keep me safe. In meditation, I learn who I am, and I can safely go from there. Boundaries are for me, not between me and someone else. They tell who I am and what I am about. They actually have nothing to do with the other person. When I say no to something, I am declaring who I am, not protecting myself or trying to influence another. No is no. It's as simple as that. And so my friend's wisdom has really helped me to see that when my values and someone else's differ, I can say what my truth is. So it's that very simple thing of like I statements over you statements in some ways, right? Like saying, this is my experience. Like I tell my students, you are the expert of your own experience. People can argue policies, but they cannot argue each other's experiences. And if we look again and respect each other and listen to each other's experiences, I've seen literally miracles of human relationship happen even within my own self when I listen to myself inside me. So that's some of the things that came to mind from your good question, Cassidy.
I don't think I can add anything to that. I think this sense when people use the word boundaries, yeah, we can think of it. I'm trying to put up a wall between me and you, but I love what your therapist said. No, I'm actually trying to define that I'm here. And when you say or do this, it infringes upon the space that I occupy, and I'm here. We do this. We bump into each other in a crowded subway and we say, "Excuse me." It's not mean to say excuse me. It's to say, "You just stepped on my foot. I just want you to know I'm here," right? And we have to give those signals to each other. I'm a lover of animals, and where I live in Florida, in my backyard, we have lots and lots of lizards. The lizards all pick out a little spot, whether if they're ground lizards of different kinds on a rock or on the lawn or on the cement, or if they're tree lizards, a place in the tree. And that's their place to hunt. And so they say, "This is my territory." And they have all these ways of bobbing their head and all the rest to signal to other lizards, "Hey, stay out of here." They're not being mean. They're saying, "I'm hunting here and I deserve a place to do my thing." And this is part of our challenge. And those of us, to come back, Cassidy, to your question of privilege, those of us who have privilege reach a point in our life where we say, do I just want to keep accumulating more and more privilege, more and more power, more and more wealth, whatever it is? Or do I want to start using the platform and power and wealth and influence and so on that I have for the benefit of other people? Do I want to start using what I have for the benefit of people who don't have as much and whose territory is being taken away? And this is another place where this question of loving those who oppose my values becomes an issue of power. I have power and other people have power. And how do I want to use my power in relation to their power? I know for many people, they aren't used to thinking about love as a form of power. But one way to understand love is power that's exercised for the common good. Not for me alone over you, not for you alone over me. It's exercise for the common good. And having that, even just caring to have a bigger picture and care about the common good is, I think, a big step of a right use of power.
So, Brian, two things. I'm so appreciative of your lizard wisdom,
Mm.
because I think that's a good image for me to have in my mind. I'm just saying, I'm here.
Yeah.
I love that. And the other thing is, I always emphasize with my students, I really want to empower you, to coach you, to help make a safe container where you can, number one, honor your voice, and number two, figure out what research or writing you want to do to contribute to the greater good or the common good. And I just think that value you're talking about of love and that strength means a lot to me. So I'm glad to hear you. That was beautifully said.
Yeah, I was talking with a friend about boundaries just yesterday and talking about the aspect of boundaries in which by utilizing them in healthy friendships, relationships, you're actually saying, I want to keep this friendship. I want to keep this relationship. And so in our culture, I think a lot of times we think of it as this is pushing someone away or getting them to go away. And also the lizard wisdom helped me think of that as well, just because they still live in community. They still care for each other. They're just asserting who they are in that moment, their space. And so I can appreciate that. This has been such a rich conversation, and what a grace to think about this important question, but also recognizing values as strengths and recognizing this love as wisdom in our lives, and what a gift that is. Brian, I know you might have a poem to read that could help kind of close out the conversation for us. Is that right?
That's right. Well, I've mentioned this before on Learning How to See. When I was in a time of a contest of power and a struggle to love, one of my mentors gave me a prayer by a Serbian Orthodox bishop named Nikolai Velimirovic. And I won't go into the whole story. This is on my website, and we can put a link if folks are interested. But I think what my mentor and friend realized was I was having people oppose me with a venom and a fury. They just wanted me to lose. And if I defended myself in a way that I just wanted them to lose, now I'm not working in the space of love. And if I were just silent and didn't say anything, or, in some ways what they wanted me to do is shut up. If I just shut up, well, that's not helping the situation either. So I'm just going to read a few lines of this poem. But I just remember when my mentor gave this to me, it was him helping me realize that I could be involved in a struggle of values, but I could do it with a humble attitude, a loving attitude, a transformative attitude. So here's the prayer. Bless my enemies, O Lord. Even I bless them and do not curse them. Enemies have driven me into your embrace more than friends have. Friends have bound me to earth. Enemies have loosed me from earth and have demolished all my aspirations in the world. Enemies have made me a stranger in worldly realms and an extraneous inhabitant of the world. Just as a hunted animal finds safer shelter than an unhunted animal does, so have I, persecuted by enemies, found the safest sanctuary, having ensconced myself beneath your tabernacle, where neither friends nor enemies can slay my soul. Bless my enemies, O Lord. Even I bless them and do not curse them. They, rather than I, have confessed my sins before the world. They have punished me whenever I have hesitated to punish myself. They have tormented me whenever I have tried to flee torments. They have scolded me whenever I have flattered myself. They have spat upon me whenever I have filled myself with arrogance. Bless my enemies, O Lord, even I bless them, and do not curse them. When I have made myself wise, they have called me foolish. Whenever I have made myself mighty, they have mocked me as if I were a fly. Whenever I've wanted to lead people, they've shoved me into the background. Whenever I rush to enrich myself, they have prevented me with an iron hand. Whenever I have thought that I would sleep peacefully, they have wakened me from sleep. In these expressions that might even seem a little overly harsh, I think we feel this bishop saying, what my enemies are doing is exposing the insecure, prideful, arrogant, braggadocious, attention-seeking parts of me that are the parts of me that get in the way. And so I'm going to continue to stand against my enemies. I'm not going to pretend that we aren't opponents. I'm going to continue to stand for the things I believe in, but I'm going to do it with a more humble spirit through this struggle. So the prayer really challenged me to stay in the fray, but to do it with a better spirit, which I have to hasten to say I've often failed at, but I haven't given up on this struggle.
Haven't we all?
Haven't we all? Yes.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for addressing this complicated topic with me. And may we all use our values, our loves, our strengths, and even our anger for the better of the common good. Grateful for both of you. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Cassidy. Thanks, Brian.
Learning How to See will be back in a moment.
When many people hear 1 Corinthians 13, they often think of it as the love chapter read at weddings. And it certainly belongs there in weddings. In fact, Sean and I picked to have 1 Corinthians 13 read at ours. But it is much more than a reading for weddings. Its relevance is as big and wide, as mysterious and powerful as life.
In fact, 1 Corinthians 13 is part of a letter that Paul, an early Christian thinker and leader, wrote to a church that was in deep conflict. As people who live in a time of polarization, hostility, mistrust, and conflict today, 1 Corinthians 13 has all our names written on it.
We begin together by reading the whole chapter slowly, and we invite you to listen deeply. If I speak with the tongues of humans and of angels, but do not have love, I am an echoing gong or a ringing cymbal. If I have prophetic gifts and can understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so I can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away everything I own, and if I surrender my body as an offering, but do not have love, I gain nothing.
Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. Love does not brag on itself. It is not inflated by disdain. It is not rude. It is not centered on the separate self. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of evil. It takes no pleasure in injustice, but rejoices with the truth.
Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. Prophecies will eventually be discarded. Speaking in tongues will stop, and knowledge will ultimately be set aside.
For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when we encounter wholeness, the parts will be released. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I understood like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became an adult, I let go of childish ways.
At present, we see unclearly, as in a mirror, but then we will see face to face. Right now, I know imperfectly. Then I will know fully, even as I am fully known. And now remain faith, hope, and love, these three, and the greatest of these is love.
Today, we would like to focus on the third section of this passage. After Paul writes two things that love is, namely patient and kind, he writes several things that love is not.
Please listen to this passage as we read it to you twice. See if there is one word in the silence after we read, then sit with that one word or phrase as with a friend and have a brief conversation with yourself about it.
Love does not envy. Love does not brag on itself. It is not inflated by disdain. It is not rude. It is not centered on the separate self. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of evil.
Love does not envy. Love does not brag on itself. It is not inflated by disdain. It is not rude. It is not centered on the separate self. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of evil.
So now, what word or phrase most catches and holds your attention, and why might that be?
Love does not envy.
Love does not brag on itself.
It is not inflated by disdain.
It is not rude.
It is not centered on the separate self.
It is not easily angered.
It keeps no record of evil.
Let's take that one word or phrase that stood out to you.
As you consider that word or phrase, now let's turn it into a positive request. For example, if what most holds your attention is love does not envy, you might say, "Help me be generous, not envious." And you can also name a specific instance of envy and ask help to let that go and to wish someone well instead. Or, help me brag about and celebrate other people, not myself, could be another way to enter into this. Or, help me be full to overflowing with appreciation for others, not inflated with disdain for them. Or, help me be considerate and gracious, not rude. Help me be centered on our interconnectedness, not our separation. Help me please have a very long fuse, not a short one. Or even, help me forgive and grieve, and not be aggrieved and hold grudges.
Now, in a period of silence, we invite you to let love be present to you, surrounding you, filling you, and we invite you to be present to the presence of love.
Thanks for investing this time in learning how to see. We trust that each episode will send thousands of us back into our daily lives with a little more skill and a little more depth in seeing everything and everyone, everywhere, with eyes of love.
Big thanks to Corey Wayne, Dorothy Abrams, and Vanessa Yee, who produce Learning How to See. Thanks to April Stace for her musical support. This episode was edited and mixed by the team at Sound On, Sound Off. To learn more about their work, visit soundonsoundoff.com. Thanks to the Center for Action and Contemplation for making Learning How to See possible. And special thanks to you for your investment of time. And thanks for sharing Learning How to See with others if you find it meaningful.
Do you feel called to walk a more contemplative path? The Center for Action and Contemplation is an educational nonprofit supporting the journey of inner transformation. Our programs and resources will help grow your consciousness, deepen your prayer practice, and strengthen your compassionate engagement with the world. Learn more about our resources, such as publications, podcasts, email series, and events at www.cac.org.